All right, Joel Gausten here from joelgausten.com. I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Mr. Frank Meyer. Frank is known primarily, I suppose, as a musician based out of Los Angeles. He's been a longtime member of the band the Streetwalkin Cheetahs. He's worked with a ton of different people, including Eddie Spaghetti and our mutual friend, James Williamson from the Stooges. Uh, just to name a couple people. And Frank's musical history could be an entirely different conversation, and perhaps it will at some point in the future. But this evening, Frank, I wanted to have you on to talk about your new film, which is called Freestyle 101 Hip Hop History. First of all, thank you so much for taking some time to chat with me about things. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man. Pleasure to be here.
Excellent. Well, as I said, you're a musician, which is how I know of you. And this whole thing started as far as us connecting because I was chatting a few days back with Bruce Duff, the great Bruce Duff. And he was telling me, oh, Frank's got this movie out, it's hip hop freestyle. And I said, of all the musical genres in my wheelhouse, hip hop is probably the least in my wheelhouse. I know quite a bit about it, but it's not, you know, the main one for me, which is what made me interested in watching this film because it wasn't a typical film that I would randomly see and check out. So it kind of leads to my first question in that, yes, you're primarily a rock and roll guy. You have a history of doing that. How did you get so entrenched in the hip hop scene to the point where we're discussing a film you've done on the subject?
Well, in the bigger scheme of things, I think I was always just interested in like rebel music, so like punk rock and heavy metal. And then when I first heard hip hop, they all kind of had the same appeal in terms of like this was music that seemed like was dangerous, and this is music that my parents didn't like. And my parents were pretty hip, but like if I played in the Sex Pistols or NWA, they suddenly were kind of square. So it fit right into that overall narrative. But the way that I actually got into hip hop was that my stepdad was an entertainment attorney, and he represented people like Tom Petty and Yoko Ono and, sort of mainstream Hollywood artists. And he represented Eazy-E in the case when a journalist named Dee Barnes asked, she worked for a TV show called Pump It Up, and she asked Dr. Dre and Eazy-E during an interview about Ice Cube having recently left the group. And that was a sensitive subject, and they might have had a few drinks or whatever, and they essentially tossed her down a flight of stairs, and she sued them. And later won, but at the time, my dad was involved in the case. And so he came home from a meeting at Ruthless Records with Eazy-E with a stack of Ruthless Records CDs and said, hey, Frank, I got these records. I'm not going to listen to them if you want them. And normally at that time, I probably would have like sold them, you know what I mean, at the like local record store and gotten $40. But I looked at him, I was like, oh, I was a Run DMC fan. It's not like I wasn't like totally, into hip hop, but I wasn't necessarily a fan. I just sort of knew like the obvious, cool hits or whatever. But I did know that NWA wrote a song called Fuck the Police that was controversial. And I did know that my overall interaction, even as a young white kid in the Valley, told me that I supported that overall narrative. So before I sold those CDs, I should probably listen to this song called Fuck the Police. And that's when I listened to Straight Outta Compton, and my little tiny brain went, and like I just kind of freaked out. And so then I started blasting through the CDs he gave me, and it was like the first Eazy-E record and the first few NWA records, and also in there, because it was on Profile, which Ruthless was through Profile, it had America's Most Wanted and the first couple Above the Law records. And so I heard all this stuff and just was like, wow, like it really hit me, because I loved punk rock and I loved heavy metal, and this music seemed to me to be like more punk rock than punk rock. I was like, man, the Clash, those dudes like took the time to learn how to play guitar. These motherfuckers didn't even learn how to play guitar. Like, wow, this is more punk rock than they like. like the Sex Pistols would creatively tell you how, like, you know, anarchy in the UK, mate, like, you know, we don't like the Queen, she represents. NWA were just like, we will shoot you in the face, fuck the police. Like, I was just like, holy shit. Like, I, you know, at that time, I'm a little kid. I loved The Road Warrior and Mad Max and Dirty Harry. You know what I mean? Escape from New York, John Carpenter, The Thing, Evil Dead, punk rock, heavy metal. And then I hear hip hop and gangster rap and conscious rap, you know, like this voice of this Black generation. And just like, I wasn't a Black kid and I wasn't trying to run around and pretend like I was. But what I was interested in was like challenging music and like rebel music and storytelling, and this music just absolutely fascinated me. So that's what got me originally into it. Later on, I became a filmmaker, and then I kind of had a separate journey into this world as a filmmaker. But that's what got me into it as a fan.
Excellent. Now, what was the genesis of this particular film, Freestyle 101?
Well, the genesis was, at the time I was, so my whole life has been like, I'm a musician, but you know, like being a musician sucks pay wise. So if you're gonna like have a life and not be like 22 years old, and especially when you have a kid and you get married, you have to figure out some way to align, if you're gonna bother staying in music, which I always have. You have to figure out a way to make that work. So you have to figure out like, what's my hustle? How do I make like my day job so I can continue playing music and not have it essentially like ruin my whole fucking life? Because it will ruin your life if you don't, you know, music, art, like it'll fuck up your whole life if you're not careful. And I'm not joking. So you figure that out, whatever that is to you. Some people are a plumber and then they play in a metal band. Some, you know what I mean? Like whatever that, some people work in the music industry. Some people are like, I don't want to work in the music industry. I'm already in the music industry playing in a band. So I'm going to do some separate shit. Whatever your version of like aligning this way of like, somehow here's how I pay my rent and I pay my bills and I take care of my kid or my wife or my ex-wife or my ex-kid or whatever the, you know, and then you do your art, right? For me, when I started, I was really young. I was a publicist, so I would like work for like record companies. Like, you know, we would send you your the writer or the radio station your PR package, and I'd be the kid calling up, going, "Hey, mate, did you get that package and that CD with the blah blah blah, the promo?" And they'd be like, "Fuck you," you know, rejection, rejection, rejection. But that shit, you know, made me kind of hard. And then so I went from doing publicity and marketing and stuff, and then I became a writer. And I was writing, which was sort of a more creative way to be into it. But on the other hand, like you're getting paid to be a writer and you're having to do a lot of bullshit stuff sometimes. And it still was sort of a hustle and something that I was like, all right, well, this is pretty close. And eventually that took me, and again, I was playing music the whole way. I started writing books, which was at least a bit more of a credible, significant way of taking my writing. And that took me into writing for TV. And where my niche was, is I ended up working for NBC, but for their digital side, writing for the websites for the TV shows on NBC. And essentially NBC at this time, and now we're at like 2004, had a new TV network called the G4 TV network. And they were doing like video game tech driven pop culture, kind of nerdy TV, the early version of this sort of mindset and programming. And I was doing their digital content. And so originally that was writing articles, and then it was making videos, and then it was producing videos, then it was learning how to edit, then it was learning how to direct. And like the guy over to my right was a guy named Joe Lynch. And Joe Lynch has since gone on to become a famous horror movie director and filmmaker. But Joe Lynch was like basically what I was doing, but he was like 6 years ahead of me in skills. So he was an actual director and like directing horror movies when he wasn't working this dumb job with me. And so meaning like here I was at a TV network where we had funding, but we were a tiny little branch of it. So it was sort of the Wild West and no one was really watching our back. So I came in as a writer, And I spent 10 plus years there, and I came out as a writer, director, editor, producer, field producer, segment producer, fucking director. I came out of there having directed BMW commercials, State Farm commercials, like major campaigns with $100,000 budgets, like big fucking shit. I came in there as a writer writing dorky articles about like fucking Resident Evil. You know what I mean? Like, so during that time, at one point, I'm working for Attack of the Show, which was, remember when Olivia Munn came out of that? It was
Sure,
sort of
sure,
a,
yeah.
yeah, it was like sort of a almost like a nerdier version of TRL, you know, but like it was on G4. And I was one of many, I mean, meaning many because the show was on for several years, but at one point I'm working for them. And I get the edict from my boss, who later became my partner in these movies. Hey, we need to come up with some web content for Attack of the Show. Like, hey, Frank, you know, you like music, like what you come up with something. And I had already done enough work at that point with some rappers and was just enough of a fan where like I was like, man, like I'm a guitar player. I have a rock and roll background. My whole music career, as we talked, as you mentioned earlier in the show, is rock and roll. But like no one was talking to rappers like they were musicians. Like it was all like, hey, when did you sell drugs? And were you a Crip? And were you a Blood? And like when did you get shot? How many times did you get shot? Like you and I was just like, man, how the fuck is no one talking to KRS-One about, or Chuck D about like their cadence and their breath control and their tempo and their music, you know? And so I knew that every rapper didn't freestyle, but I knew that every rapper started from that point of just rhyming off the top with their buddies and like kicking in a, you know, hallway or beatboxing in their school or whatever, you know, off their lunch table, or battling or ciphering. So I knew that like any rapper, if I asked them, when was the first time you ever heard someone freestyle rap? When was the first time anyone ever like gave you that opportunity? That we could talk and that would lead us wherever we go. And even if that rapper wasn't an expert freestyler, that was just sort of a good conversation piece and gave me kind of an overall narrative. You know what I mean? Like something to go with it instead of just like talking to rappers. So the very first, so I basically went to NBC and said, like, will you let me use one of your studios and like bring in rappers and like make a show out of that? And they were like, well, we don't really have a real budget for that. I'm like, I'll do everything. I'll direct it. I'll book them. I'll edit it. Well, where are you going to get the music from? I'll make the beats. Well, I guess so. Will you get them to sign them a release? Yeah, I'll get it signed. They'll sign a release. Like we'll do it. We'll do it. It'll all be above board. Don't worry. All right. Well, it's up to you. See what you can do. First rapper I booked was Devin the Dude. Second rapper was Killa Priest. Third one was Bus Driver. I don't remember who was fourth, but I know quickly after that we were into Razkaz, Sean Price, a very young Terminology, and we started winning. We had Planet Asia on, and Peace from Freestyle Fellowship, and Micah 9, and then we won a bunch of awards, and then all of a sudden we had Ice-T and Mobb Deep and MOP and Fat Joe and Dell and Murs and Tech Nine and Insane Clown Posse and Wu-Tang Clan. And I was like I was rolling out to New York and shooting dudes, and I was booking, like, Prodigy from Mobb Deep literally lent me he was going to jail on a gun charge for 2 years, and he's like, I have all this studio time, I'm gonna give you 2 days, like in my, like, I just basically got his number through, fuck, I don't even know who gave me his number, but someone gave me Prodigy's number, and he told me he had this studio, and basically he's like, I'm going to be in and out, but I won't even be rolling in till like after 8 p.m. So like between noon and 8 p.m., I'm paying for it. There's a staff there. You can just have it. And I'm like, really? What do I got to pay you? He goes, nothing. Sean Price. Sean Price was the same way. I don't know if you know Sean Price is. Sean Price is an incredible rapper. Sean Price is another guy. I had him out in Redondo Beach one day, and then when I rolled out to New York, he was like, well, let me hook you up with Boot Camp. And he brought in Rock Ness, he brought in Buckshot, he hooked me up with Immortal Technique. Like, he started just hooking me up with MCs because he just liked this idea that you're talking to rappers like musicians. You know what I mean? Like, you're talking to us about rapping. And that was the premise of the movie. And then or that was the premise of the podcast. And then as it became a movie, I kind of went down this avenue of like what freestyling is, and that it's this idea of improvisation. And then I sort of follow these younger artists and like how their lives and careers are. Like, okay, you're an expert freestyler, but like, what does that mean, like in the music industry?
Well, I love the point you had said earlier about talking about the creative aspect of hip hop music, because I agree with you. A lot of that's missed when you look at other documentaries or news reports on the genre and the culture. It's always strife in the inner cities and politics and police, and certainly all those things are important, and
Yeah, that's part of the narrative, but
but
there's
let's talk
artistry
about,
and craftsmanship.
right, you mentioned NWA a few minutes ago. I remember when that album came out because I was in grade school at the time, and I'm in suburban New Jersey back then. That record, I go on the bus to school, kids with the Walkmans had Straight Outta Compton, and the parents were freaking out. Oh, these are gang members. This is an ugly scene. This is criminal. Okay, there's an image there. I'll give you that. But listen to the fucking songs. Those are beautifully crafted pieces of music.
And also, isn't that the same effect that like when the Sex Pistols hit, you know what I mean? People, it's like that, or when Nirvana hit, it's like that same thing of like when a wave of music and like a genre and a whole kind of movement hits, like black, white, whatever, people are just like, damn, like, are my kids okay with this gangster rap thing, this punk rock thing, these heavy metal kids, you know what I mean? Like rave is out of control. It's like every 10 years there's some musical genre that has parents, and now I'm a parent, so I get it, like upset. But also, isn't that the definition of like what we want music to be? Don't we want there to be like, as music fans, like we need there to be that upset where every 10 years something just upsets the apple cart, makes everyone just go like, oh shit, whoa, I didn't see this coming.
But it's fantastic that you really honed in on the creative aspect of it and really got into the inner workings of these artists. I mean, that's such a fascinating part of what you did with this film. A couple of the people who stand out to me, who just blew my mind, on the very top of that list is Supernatural, who lives up to his name. I mean, I've never seen anything like that before. And Iron Solomon is fantastic too. What can you tell me about those particular people as far as working with them and creating their parts of this movie?
Well, what I discovered as I went down this path, so again, freestyling was sort of the premise that I originally went with. But I also knew that freestyling is essentially improvisational rap. And not everyone is necessarily an improvisational rappers. In fact, a lot of people, just like in pop music and rock and roll or any genre, are writers. They might start being someone that's improvisational, but as they become like they figure out their lane as an artist, they become a songwriter. And that's fine. But our movie is about improvisational rap, or just the difference between that and lyricism when we're going down the history of it. So originally, the film starts off telling you the history of this genre, freestyle rap. And where it lands is two different styles. On the West Coast, you've got these sort of more artsy thing coming out of places like the Good Life Cafe, which was this little sort of like scene around Lemert Park, and then later that became Lemert Park and Project Blowed. And these were these scenes happening in sort of the South Central area that were more based on like Apollo style, like you get on stage and you have to like improvise, and like the audience you're in front of are all rappers, and you can't come in like have your shit written and think that you're gonna like fool the audience. They'll be like, no, we can tell. Like you have to be off the top and ready to go, and they'll throw up a beat and an MC, like you might be battling another MC. There might be a DJ you're not familiar with, and you're just sort of to roll with that. And that's how you survive that scene. So it's all improvisational. On the East Coast, you had like this battle scene where guys not only have to have that skill of being improvisational because you're battling someone and going at them based on like that moment and that reaction and what they just said and what they just said about you, But you also, much like boxing, are encouraged to maybe have done some homework. Like if this kid's claiming he's like a gangbanger or a coke dealer, and you know he went to like private Catholic school, you better like have figured that out and have a whole, like rhyme ready to like drop a bomb on that audience, because you're there to please that crowd. So there's more theatrics involved, there's money involved, and it's more like boxing, where it's like you're out there sparring with another guy to get points and win that. Whereas, like I said, on the West Coast, it's less about that whole boxing philosophy. So as I went down that path, I realized there's really two different kind of freestylers. That's why I follow Iron Solomon, and he's the example of the battle rapper. And he's a white guy too, so he's also dealing with the fact that he's a white guy, and for the most part, hip hop and certainly battling is mainly black guys. It's a black culture. So he's got that sort of as his like disadvantage, if you will. On the West, we're following Open Mike Eagle, who sort of comes from that improvisational background, but he's trying to take sort of what he's learned and been informed from that as an artist, and trying to, write songs and package it into something that, he's coming from like what now, when I filmed this movie, Kendrick wasn't such a big thing, but like from that Kendrick philosophy of like, hey man, I came from this like Lamert Park, South Central, weirdo beat artist, poetry, alternative rock kind of scene going on. And now that's my hip hop. So Open Mike Eagle's taking all that freestyle ethos and philosophy and making like songs out of that. And so that's where I use these guys as examples. That and Supernatural, though, now he's a different monster. Supernatural holds the Guinness Book of World Records, or at least at the time when we made the movie, for the longest rap of all time, continuous freestyle of all time, 9 hours. And he's allowed pee breaks and breath breaks. It's not like he has to just go for straight. But essentially, I mean, like any world record thing, it's 9 hours with tiny little breaks. And he talks to us. Well, we see an example of it, as you see in the movie. And he talks to us more from that point of view of like, you have to be so skilled with your language and so ahead of the moment. So when you're hearing a word, you're thinking of 5 rhymes before you get to those 5 rhymes. And that's where, to me, freestyling, because I'm a guitar player, like I came up in rock and roll playing like lead guitar, and I'm a pretty solid improvisational lead guitar player. Like you could just pretty much throw me in a band and give me a guitar, and I could pretty much just jam along and solo for however long you got. Not every guitar player is like that, though. Some guys are songwriters, some guys are just rhythm guitar players. They don't do soloing at all. And some guys do soloing, but they read charts and stuff, and they're not necessarily improvising. I don't read charts. I came from the improvisational school when it comes to lead guitar playing. That, to me, I think is why I really relate to freestyle rapping, because I see that improvisational thing where it's like, it doesn't matter how skilled you are. It doesn't matter how musical you are. I mean, it does, of course. We're all musical. We're musicians. But you know what I mean? But like, there's something about the brain that allows you to just disconnect from logic and sort of float above it in this sort of dream state. Like Gift of Gab in the movie talks about it being like a dream state. And I know, as a musician who's, like I've done some long ass improvisational, hopefully badass, guitar moments where I know, like, I don't feel like I'm on planet Earth. And so that, to me, when I see a good freestyler, not just a good rapper, not just a good singer, but when you see somebody really improvising and really kind of doing something that like is only happening in that moment, and that you, the audience, and then the musicians it's only happening once. There's something magical about that. And to me, it's, in the world of music, it's the closest thing to like actual magic. You know what I mean? Like, meaning like you could talk about like levitation, time travel, you know what I mean? Like, but like, it's hard to like put your finger on like actual examples of that unless you think about music. because there's moments when through music you will time travel. You ever had that moment where you're listening to something and all of a sudden you're just totally brought back to a moment, like a taste, smell, like,
Yeah.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like
Oh yeah.
music actually has the ability to, like, in a bizarre way that doesn't make any logical sense to like fucking God and science, but like music can actually create time travel. Music can do the same thing where like music can like literally make the whole room sort of stop, and like you could just have this moment that like out of body experiences. And I've had that moment as a musician really only when I'm improvising, and I've had that moment as a filmmaker only when I've been filming musicians improvising.
Well, let's stay on that for a minute, because really the most, in my opinion, the most fascinating element of your film is you get into the science of brain activity when someone is improvising.
Yeah, yeah.
Please tell me about that and how that particular element of your research came to be, because and I encourage everyone to check out the film, of course, because this segment in particular is utterly fascinating.
We went to Johns Hopkins University and we talked to a guy named Dr. Charles Lim. And originally he was, I think it was Open Mike Eagle, who's one of the stars of the film, turned us on to him because he had been part of a study where Dr. Lim was himself a jazz musician, and he was sort of obsessed with this idea of what the brain does when it's improvising, as opposed to when it's like reading script or following, you know, kind of everyday, you know, activities, you know, like when you get used to things, you sort of do things by rote, versus when you're like challenged and your mind is challenged. And he was using jazz, like trumpet and improvise, you know, jazz improvisational trumpet players and freestyle hip hop improvisational vocalists as his examples. And then he was putting them in MRIs and studying their brain activity when like a guy was blowing trumpet or a rapper would be rapping, meaning he'd be in an MRI with headphones on, hearing a beat, and he'd have a microphone going into his headphones, and the doctor outside would just be throwing out words like tree, fresh, you know, challenge, and the rapper's just like challenge, I challenge you, fresh, I fresh mother, you know what I mean? So it's, they're watching the way the brain works, and essentially they were saying that the right and the left side are connecting in a much more active way when the brain is freestyling, and that there's this sort of brain activity that you go into in life when you're used to things, and when you're improvising, that whole side is just sort of shut off, and your creative side and your non-creative side are just actively communicating, essentially without this like middleman filter that also, or that often comes in when you're going, you know, through the motions. So it's interesting. And we just thought that if we're going to do a whole thing about the idea of rapping and improvising, that we should go down that scientific path. There's a rapper in the film named Razkaz who said, you know, life is like a freestyle. And so I kind of got very enthused about this idea of like, you know, freestyle rapping means like being able to think on your feet and bob left and bob right, you know, like it, just like in life, like, you know, you go, oh, this is what I'm going to do this year, I'm going to get this job, I'm going to do this thing, and all of a sudden like life hits you, and oh my, this person, this happens, this person, you know, and all of a sudden like shit, I got nothing worked out the way, and I still gotta pay rent, I still gotta this, I got these life responsibilities. So I like this idea of like freestyle rapping representing almost being like the pure, or certainly the idea of improvisation in music being the most pure representation of what life is really like.
Absolutely. And that actually leads me to a brilliant quote in the film. And the film is narrated by Chuck D, we should mention it.
Which, by the way, you can't get any. I mean, when Chuck D says something, you're like, damn, that sounds important. I
Yes.
mean, Chuck D is the greatest of all time, and I was honored that he was, you know, so cool and worked with us on our film, and you know, yeah, incredible.
Who wrote the narrative for the film?
I mean, I wrote the film, I edited the film, I directed the film. Don't get me wrong, it was not a one-man show. Like I said, my former boss at G4, Robert Juster, produced it with me, and he helped me, create the whole thing and get the footage and all that stuff. And our editor David Schneider worked with me for many, many years helping that. But a lot of it was me just having this dream and this idea and wanting to sort of keep this thing alive. And I was just lucky enough to be surrounded with these like great believers in the cause, or believers in me. You know what I mean? Some of these folks that worked on the film, just a lot of it's just me kind of going, guys, we got something here. And they go, all right, hey man, you're my guy. Let's do it.
Well, I'd like to read a quick statement from the film, which Chuck says in the documentary. Just like a freestyle, life can be a series of quick decisions and spontaneous reactions. When an MC missteps, we call it falling off. You can fall off in a rhyme, and you can fall off in life. It's all about the decisions you're forced to make on the spot. It's fantastic. It's brilliant, man.
Thanks, man.
Brilliant.
Well, I wrote that piece, but Chuck delivered it, and a lot of that stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if Chuck helped me craft that on the spot. I don't have the original script in front of me, but I will tell you this for sure, is that Chuck is a smart guy and a writer himself.
Mhm.
So I came in, we did 2 sessions. There was like an early session when the film wasn't quite completed, and then there was a later session when the film was completed, where we sort of corrected some things and redid some things, or just had some new pieces. And in both situations, like, he was awesome. I mean, he's exactly what you want. He's cool, he's got all that personality, but he's also like, he's chill, and meaning like, he had watched, I'd given him early cuts of the film. He'd watched it, he knew who we were talking about, he understood what the context was, he was willing to take direction. You know what I mean? Like, he wasn't just sort of like, yeah, give me your script. Like, if I had ideas and stuff, he was like, oh yeah. And there was a great I think I had a line when we got back to Lamert Park at the end of the movie, and I had Scene of the Crime, and he went, hey Frank, what if it was Scene of the Rhyme? And I was like, oh man, yeah, of course, correct that line, Scene of the Rhyme. And like, meaning he himself is a wordsmith, and I was just so honored to be there. So I was very encouraging of him to be improvisational, but at the same time, he was very encouraging of me to give him direction, so he wasn't just sitting there reading a bunch of bullshit and not understanding like what the context was. And you know what I mean? And he kind of seemed very in tune with my passion for it. I think a lot of how this whole thing came about is just that as it went on, anyone I talked to about this subject matter saw that I was coming at it from passion and love for the music and love for the art form and an interest in the art form. Like, and I was like, meaning I was never claiming to be an expert. You know what I mean? Like, my whole thing is like, man, tell me, you're the expert. Like, I want to know what you know. So I feel like a lot of what propelled this whole project was me just being genuinely interested in something that guys who did this for a living were not often asked these questions. And so they wanted to kind of talk about it. And so I could get very famous or not so famous, but everyone was the same once I got them in the booth. You know what I mean? Like, they all were just like artists wanting to talk about their craft in a serious manner without all the bullshit.
Right. Right. And I know this film took a while to finish, because I know some of the interviews date back a few years. How long did the entire process take to when you decided to go in his direction to when the thing was finally finished?
Well, it was like 2008 through 2012 was when I was shooting the original podcast. Then there was a little bit of a gap, and I started shooting the movie version of it up until 2015. And that's when the whole G4 thing, and any rights that we had. Like we were sort of still staggering along trying to make this thing in the world of NBC till 2015, and then all that fell apart. And then a few years went by while we negotiated the footage, and me and Rob Juster continued making the Risen movie, which we didn't even go into that. But while all this was happening, one of the guys that I had filmed for the movie was this, or for the original podcast, and was supposed to be in the movie, was this rapper named Hellraiser. And Hellraiser was a Wu-Tang Clan Sons of Man member. And I had known Hellraiser going back to 1997, because when I was in my early days coming right out of college, I was a publicist, and one of the early groups I worked on was Sons of Man. And Sons of Man featured a young Killer Priest and Hellraiser, and they got signed to a big label, and I was their publicist. And like we all broke into showbiz together. Like I took them to the Source and Rap Pages and the Billboard Awards, and like all, I went on tour with them. Like those guys were my dudes. So like as we all went on in life, Hellraiser and I stayed in touch. Then I'm doing this podcast, G4. Of course, he's one of the rappers I have on. Killer Priest was the second rapper, like I said, on the show. Why? Because that's my guy. Like fucking Priest was my dude, right? So in 2010-ish or so, when I'm doing the podcast and sort of starting the early work on the film, Hellraiser has a brain aneurysm and loses the whole left side to his body and can't talk, walk, or rap anymore. And so a few years later, when we lost all the rights to all this footage that we were shooting for the Freestyle movie, I decided, like, fuck it, I don't need you guys to make the Hellraiser movie. I mean, like, I was already kind of starting to film Hellraiser, and it was going to be part of the Freestyle movie. But then, because I was like, well, if you're going to talk about rapping, talk about a guy that can't rap anymore. But then all of a sudden, like, I lost the footage, and just Razor and I were always bros, and I was like, fuck this, man. Let's you and me, we're just going to tell your story. So I stayed on with that. Me and Rob stayed on with that for years and years and years, and kept following Razor. And we made a whole movie based on that. And during that time, we got the rights back to the Freestyle stuff. So by the time 2020 happened, the movie Risen, the story of Sharon Hellraiser Smith, was out winning awards on the film festival circuit. And we had gotten the rights back to the Freestyle movie. And then the fucking pandemic happened. And all of a sudden I was like, well, I guess I got time to cut this Freestyle movie. So I kind of went back to all the old footage and essentially reconstructed the movie I intended on making, but minus the Hellraiser element, because that had become another movie. And then just, spent a while. I mean, I had plenty of time at that point. And then after that, it was just getting all the legal shit done and getting a distribution deal. And, it's been a long road. But so really, if you were to look at this, between 2008 and 2015, me and Rob Juster did a giant body of work in the world of hip hop, sort of exploring the story of freestyling in terms of what it means as a lifestyle and also what it means in hip hop. And this movie is essentially, that story.
Right on, right on. We should mention too, going back to Bruce Duff from the beginning of the conversation.
Who does music? Because a lot of
that, for the music for this, right?
Well, so throughout all of this, actually even before this, but around all this time, Bruce and I were making like hip hop beats, just because we were two rock and roll musicians that loved hip hop, and we were just doing our own thing. And so we were producing for different artists. We were actually doing some stuff with Hellraiser and Insane Poetry and K Reno out of Houston, Dopey out of Houston. Like, we were doing some stuff with some underground artists, Necro out of New York. And but just making mixtapes and stuff. Nothing was like popping. And then all of a sudden I'm doing this podcast, and I'm like, man, listen, I need beats like right now, like, meaning I got rappers coming in. What I quickly learned, working with rappers in this scenario where, like, they're coming in thinking they're doing an interview, and I've told their publicist they're going to rap, but they often didn't quite have their heads wrapped around that. And so I would kind of come in and go, look, we're going to talk about freestyle rapping or freestyling versus lyricism, or, wherever this conversation goes. But I'm going to put you on the mic and you're going to rap. So if you can freestyle, let's do that. And if you can't, you can give me 16 bars off your new record, whatever you want. I don't care. But I want it all like in one take on the mic. Like, I don't want to piece together a music video. I want like you on a mic doing your thing, right? And generally everyone was fine with that. But like, not every rapper can just, do their thing at any tempo with, some guys need certain cadence, like they need tempos that they can do cadences as they might like a 3/4 versus a 4/4. Like some people like up tempo, you know what I'm saying? Like, just like any musician, like not every guitar player can just play to any single fucking piece of music you just throw at them. They might need, give me like, okay, that one I can jam on, you know what I mean? So what I realized is that if I was going to ask a famous rapper who does this for a living to impromptu rap for me on camera, and I might show it on NBC, I had to be able to provide them with a bunch of beats to where they went, okay, I'm comfortable with this. And I'm also comfortable that if it takes me 3 or 4 takes, you're only going to use the good one and not show me fucking up. And I was just like, look, dude, you know what I mean? I got you. I'm here to make you look great. So me and Bruce were doing all the beats at first, but then there was so many episodes I had to start hiring other beat makers, and we just had like 3 or 4 other dudes, and we were just doing beats left and right.
Excellent, excellent. Now, you're a musician yourself, so you're intimately involved with your own creative process musically. How would you say working with these artists, doing the film, doing the podcast, which begat the film, how would you say the freestyle world has most impacted and informed what you do now on your own steam?
I would say there's a difference between improvising and writing a song. And in the world of writing a rock song, usually you're writing something that's more structured, and you're kind of, this isn't just a rock song. When you're writing a song, you're writing something that's more structured, and there might be repetition within that structure. And, the idea is to get people with a hook, because these days it's really the hook that commands people's attention. They remember the hook, but there might be moments to improvise within that. A lead vocal might have moments where within all of this sort of like the structure of like, here's the chorus and here's the verse, you can do a little bit of little bebop and then scatting around and stuff. And as a soloist, if you were the lead guitar player, depending on the instrumentation, like the one who maybe is given a, hey, for 8 bars you can solo, you know what I mean? So there's improvisation within structured songs. So what I find as a musician, the way freestyling, and in this case I'm just going to call it improvisation, informs me is that I need to write songs. That's my bread and butter. That is what propels my business and my brand, is writing songs. No one gives a shit about me just, jamming all day. You know what I mean? Me jacking off all day. Sexually, it might be interesting because I'm very well endowed. Of course, you understand that. Everyone understands that or assumes it. But I'm just saying, beyond the visible structure of that incredible sensation, no one wants to see that. And really, it's all about like, can you write a good song? So within the genres I do, I try to write these great songs. Now, within those songs, I have moments to improvise. And that's where my brain that knows how to improvise goes, okay, you got 8 bars, 4 bars, 16 bars, a long jam section, or just little moments as a vocalist where between singing the hook, you can go, wow, hey, all right, just do little things to just make it so it's not so formulaic. And so I just think that's what I get from it as a songwriter, is that like you can't just always think in terms of hooks and structure and repetition and like, here's the way that I've constructed a 3.5-minute song, because that all works. But what sells it to the listener, to me, is those moments of human touch when it breaks from the repetition and there's just some moment, whether, again, doesn't matter the genre, it could be pop, hip hop, metal, whatever, but something where the singer just does something, or the lead guitar player, just where you go like, oh, ooh, that little thing there, that's what, you know what I mean, those human touches.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, I want everyone who would see this video to obviously see the film. What's the best way for them to do so? Where can they find this?
So we are on Amazon Prime. The movie is called Freestyle 101 Hip Hop History. It's on Amazon Prime. It's on Google Play. It's on YouTube Movies. You can also go to freestyle101movie.com. You can also go to any of the social medias, Freestyle 101 Hip Hop History, blah, 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 on all of them, TikTok and Instagram and Facebook. And one thing I would encourage is, if you watch the movie, leave a review on Amazon. The way that things work in this digital age is like, the more people that give it a star on Amazon or review it or leave, YouTube comments, like that stuff really does like actually like help out genuinely. So just please, if you like it, say so. And yeah.
Excellent. And where can people find out about you and your music and your bands and your ever-growing discography?
Well, it's a lot. It's a lot to digest. Frank Zappa is kind of my hero. So I sort of look to Frank Zappa in that, like, I hope that one day, if people go, oh my God, this guy that made this metal music and these documentary films and all this digital content, and then was in this punk band and then this blues band, and then they figure it all out. I want it to be like this Rubik's Cube of like art, you know what I mean? Where you're just like, fuck, how's that possible? So you could go to thefrankmeyer.com, MEYER. If you want to check out my directing stuff, thefrankmeyerdirector.com. And you can check me out on Instagram and all that, and Facebook, just the Frank Meyer or Frank Meyer or whatever. MEYER, though. I have the rare, incredible luck of having two hot dog references in my name, Frankfurter and Oscar Mayer. So you can imagine growing up the schoolyard antics that I got into.
It would be something if you ended up being vegan after all that, right?
I mean, I really feel like I should, except, boy, I love a good hot dog. And I also love bacon more than anything. So you give me a bacon wrapped dog, shit.
Good to go, man. Good to go. Well, listen, this has been great, and like I said, I love the film. I wouldn't have gone to it unless Bruce hadn't tipped me off to it. So thank you, Bruce.
Bruce, listen, Bruce is the purveyor of all cool. He's the thing that links all the cool stuff together. So, cheers to Bruce stuff.
Absolutely, absolutely. But my congratulations to you on getting this thing out. It's a very unique documentary on a subject that deserved to be explored the way you've explored it. So thank you for doing that work.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Excellent. Until we speak again, sir, it's been a pleasure. Take care.